Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez says that she can't afford to pay rent in Washington, D.C., and this led to a controversy. In my opinion, an entirely fake controversy, because apparently this started after she did an interview saying she couldn't afford rent in D.C., and then Fox News ran a segment where they actually agreed with her for the most part that D.C. is really expensive, but she then characterized it as them laughing at the housing crisis. I watched the segment, and yeah, they're laughing, but they actually agree with her. I don't think it was all that bad. But now you have a lot of people saying, you know, look, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, it's your fault because you applied for a job that required relocation without saving up any money to take that job. Most people wouldn't apply for a job that required them to move if they couldn't afford to move. But a lot of companies do offer to pay for relocation. So look, I think there's a real issue here in that Washington, D.C. is incredibly expensive. And I made a tweet about this where I said, if working class people, you know, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez was a bartender before, apparently a bartender before getting involved in politics, you can't expect them to save up the $6,000 or so they would need on average to move to Washington, D.C. And it's a reality that there are a lot of Congress people sleeping in their offices, something like 1 in 5, because they actually can't afford to live in the city. So today, let's take a look at the news. Let's break down the fake controversy where the left and the right are going after each other for pretty much nothing. And I also want to talk about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's $3,500 suit and her $600 shoes and dispel some myths. But before we get started, let me give a quick shout out to today's sponsor, Virtual Shield. Virtual Shield is a virtual private network. This means they help keep your data safe and private while you use the internet. They're offering a Black Friday sale, 40% off right now if you go to hidewithtim.com. Just go to hidewithtim.com, click Get This Exclusive Deal, and you can get started with a free 30-day trial. The way I always say it is, you know, look, we don't expect someone to steal our data. We don't expect someone to break into our homes, but we still lock our doors and windows. So it makes sense to have a simple layer of security to help keep your data safe when you're browsing the internet. So for those that are interested, the link will be in the description below. From NBC Washington, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez can't afford to rent a DC apartment until her congressional salary starts. Quote, I have 3 months without a salary before I'm a member of Congress, so how do I get an apartment? Would you be able to rent a DC apartment if you didn't get paid for 3 months? Congresswoman-elect Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez said she can't. The New York Millennial told the New York Times in a story published Wednesday that she needs to wait until her congressional salary kicks in to get an apartment in D.C., which ranks among the most expensive cities in the country for renters. Ocasio-Cortez, who will represent parts of New York City, started the year as a bartender. She will make $174,000 per year as a member of Congress. Now that's a pretty good salary. That's not chump change. But here's the thing. As a representative, she has to maintain a residence in New York and Washington, D.C. So you have to take that into consideration. She is going to be getting a pretty decent salary as a congressperson, but she needs to pay rent in New York and in D.C. You also need to consider that to move to D.C., she not only needs 1 month rent at an average of $2,000, she's going to need first, last, and security maybe. So maybe up to $8,000, maybe $6,000. Moving is not cheap. Then there's relocating costs. I mean, she's probably going to have to furnish the place she gets to live in. A lot of people said she can simply commute, get something just outside of D.C., and that's fair too. But rent is still going to be potentially $1,500 to $2,000 even outside of the D.C. metro. We can look at the average rent in Washington, D.C., and I think it's fair to say she'd want to get a 1-bedroom apartment, maybe even a studio. So you could actually lower this down a little bit, but still, she's going to need maybe $5,000 to try and move in. As somebody who was a bartender, I'm not surprised she doesn't have the $5,000 or more she would need to relocate for her new job. And I do think it's fair to point out that, look, if you're going to apply for a job in a different city, you probably should prepare to be able to move to that city. I also think it's fair to point out she has to maintain a residence in both New York and in DC. And I also think it's fair to point out that she is an elected representative. It's kind of a different job. And so it is an issue then when you learn people who are serving in Congress can't afford rent because they have to pay for both places they live in. ThinkRealty.com has this story from May. DC congressmen sleeping on cots can't afford housing. According to a report from the New York Post, some lawmakers are sleeping on cots in their offices in order to save money on renting a DC apartment during times of the year Congress is in session. One representative told the Post, Washington is too expensive, he added. If we get to the point where you have to rent or buy in DC to be in Congress, then only millionaires would be members of Congress. Critics of the practice say it is unprofessional and not proper. One congressman is even sponsoring a bill to make the practice illegal. He accuses those sleeping in their offices or closets as taking advantage of free electricity, free janitorial, free security, and no rent. U.S. representatives make $174,000 a year for their service in Congress and are required to maintain a legal residence in their own state. In the D.C. area, one-bedroom apartments rent start around $2,000 a month. She's getting paid $174,000 a year once she's a congressperson. Moving there is the big challenge. Once she gets paid, yeah, it's going to be fine. Now, her average take-home per week is going to be just close to $5,000, which means around half of the money she makes after taxes will probably go towards paying rent, which is kind of normal for most people in New York City. If she's spending maybe $1,800 to $2,000 per month living in New York, yes, New York is expensive, and DC, you know, a one-size-fits-all salary for congresspeople doesn't necessarily make a lot of sense, but I know what the solution is. What I can say, it's absolutely absurd, in my opinion, to mock Cortez because she's struggling to move to DC. Even if she rents a studio apartment, she's still going to need several $1,000s in savings. And the reality is most Americans don't have several $1,000s in savings. Most Americans are in debt. So it's not something to make fun of. But here's the other reality. Nobody really made fun of her to begin with. Yeah, probably some people on the internet were laughing at her, but the Fox News segment where she claimed they were laughing at her, they actually agreed with her. Cortez tweeted, "Fox News, why can't any of your anchors say my name correctly? It's been 5 months. It is bizarre to see 1% salaried anchors laugh at the U.S. housing crisis. Never purchase pricey clothes, always told my story, but repeating lies until they are believed is your thing." And she quoted Parker Malloy, who has a segment from Fox News. Now, I don't want to play through the whole clip because it's a couple minutes, but while they are kind of chuckling and laughing, this woman right now is explaining she's right. DC is expensive, and other congresspeople feel the same way. This other woman that they just showed is laughing as well, but she's talking about how there's a very real issue of power concentrated in Washington, D.C., and extremely high rent. This segment, they're in agreement with Cortez. Now, I'll admit, near the end of this 2-minute segment, they do bring up the clothes she was wearing, a common criticism of Cortez. And this criticism is kind of wrong, and it's kind of right. I think both sides are kind of getting this one wrong, right? So I have this article from the Foundation for Economic Education, and they say Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez's $3,500 suit fits a long-standing socialist tradition. Despite the core assertions made by its adherents and promoters, in practice, socialism is always an exercise in privilege. But I just want to wrap up that last thought real quick before talking about the clothing that Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez wore in that photo shoot. The issue is, everybody is acting like there's a battle between the right and the left over the expensive rent in DC, but that's just not really the case. I mean, some people did make fun of her. Some people said she should have saved for this. Some people are saying if you're a responsible adult, you need to be prepared for the job you applied for, and all of that's fair. And I think another thing to point out, too, is that, you know, to the average person who's in their 30s, they might actually have a savings and would be able to get a place to live in DC. Sure, I understand that. She is the youngest person ever elected to Congress at, now, I believe now she's 29. And so, yeah, 29-year-olds don't have big savings. And so I think this is also a factor of her being so young and not having money saved up to be able to move. One of the more important points that I think needs to be made outside of all of this fake controversy is that she only got elected because our system isn't designed for actual competition in congressional races. She won a primary against Joe Crowley by something like 2,000 votes. She got about 15,000 votes in a district of 700,000 plus. When it came time to vote, people just checked off the Democrat box. And she ended up winning with no experience, with no savings, with an inability to actually move to DC. And to me, it sounds like the people who voted for her didn't really know what they were voting for, other than she's a young upstart, she's making history in a lot of ways, but she really isn't prepared for this role. She's had numerous gaffes. She said absolutely ridiculous things. She said something like 200 million people in the United States are working on less than 20 grand a year, when the US workforce is only 154 million. She's basically the queen of gaffes. A lot of people have said that she's kind of like a left-wing Donald Trump. You know, she's a populist upstart from the left who defied the polls and won in her district and says things that are often incorrect. And so they compare her to Trump. That's the real issue here. Not that she can't afford rent, but that because of the way the system was set up, Ocasio-Cortez got elected when she was not prepared to represent her district. That includes being able to save, understanding the requirements of the job you applied for. I think it's fair to say you shouldn't make fun of her because she can't afford rent, sure. But think about when she said, I want to run for Congress, she should have understood the requirements for going to DC and everything that would be expected of her to represent her district. It's not just rent. It's the gaffes she's made. It's the mistakes she's made. This person, in my opinion, is not prepared to be a representative. But I think it's awesome that in the US, you really can elect anybody. And I do think it's a problem then. With our system, the only qualification for the most part is that you're an American and you are willing to serve. So it does become problematic then when some people, even if they are prepared, even if they do understand, can't afford to live in a city where they're going to serve their district. It's fair. There's fair criticism of Cortez, and there's fair criticism of those who would mock her for this. But let's end the myth of the clothing she was wearing, which I can criticize her for, I will, but let's talk about this clothes. She didn't own the clothes, it's a photo shoot. So here's her fancy suit and her $600 shoes, and everybody started ragging on her saying, oh, the socialist is wearing expensive clothes. How could she afford this? She claims to be working class. She does not own these clothes. These were given to her in a photo shoot. Photo shoots will often present a wardrobe and say, go ahead and wear these. So to those who are saying, she bought an expensive outfit, you're wrong, she didn't. And this article from the Foundation for Economic Education, they recognize, yes, she doesn't own these. She said this. And some people have pointed out she's just wearing this. It's a marketing shoot. But I do think it's fair to criticize her for the excesses of even wearing the expensive suit. You're a socialist. You're a populist. You're for the working class, you say. You shouldn't be wearing an expensive outfit that serves as marketing to a class you can't really represent. Now, by all means, as a representative, you're gonna be there for the rich people and the poor people alike. But the issue is, to your constituents, they're gonna see you wearing this outfit, they can never buy it. It doesn't matter if you own it or not. You are marketing for an expensive outfit that most people in the world can't buy. So who is your target audience when you wear this? A lot of people have been criticizing Cortez, saying that as soon as she got elected, she started pulling back to the center. They started saying that she is becoming more like the corporate Democrats. I don't think it's entirely true. She's still pushing for Medicare for all and other positions that are just too expensive to afford for our country. So she is still pushing that populist left narrative, but it does seem like she is pulling towards the mainstream, especially when she decides to do a photo shoot and wear clothes that she knows her constituents cannot afford. So what are you really doing? Why would you wear it? Is it nice to wear nice clothes? I'm sure a lot of people who like Cortez say, look, I'm glad she got to enjoy a fancy outfit that she probably wouldn't be able to afford in the first place, and good for her. But it's marketing. The reason she was given the clothes was to market them in a photo shoot. To rich people. To the rich people she claims to a certain extent, oppose. I understand, like I said, she's going to represent rich people in her district too, don't get me wrong. I'm just saying, when you're a populist challenging the elites, marketing to them is a little, I don't know, counterintuitive. But I can ramble on this nonstop, okay? So comment below and let me know what you think about Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I think you should absolutely tear into her all day and night for her gaffes and her bad opinions. And that's fair, and that's politics. And she'll have to respond to that and become a better person. But to make fun of her because rent is expensive, it's a bad play. Again, I feel like it's a non-issue. The controversy seems made up. I don't even think Fox News was really making fun of her. They were kind of agreeing with her for the most part. But again, comment below. We'll keep the conversation going. You can follow me on Twitter at Timcast. Stay tuned. New videos every day at 4 p.m. and more videos coming up on my second channel, youtube.com/TimcastNews at 6 p.m. Thanks for hanging out, and I'll see you all next time.